What if the person you fell deeply in love with had a past that could tear your family apart? Sounds impossible, right? But life has a funny way of throwing us into situations we could never predict. My love story isn't a typical one. It's complicated, messy, and yes, tied to a scandalous secret that changed everything. I married my mom's ex-husband. Now before you judge, let me ask you this. How far would you go for love? What would you sacrifice to be with someone who truly makes you feel seen? These aren't easy questions, and trust me, I've wrestled with them more than I can count. In this video, I'm taking you behind the scenes of a story that's filled with family drama, moral dilemmas, and shocking revelations. But it's not just about the pain, it's about the lessons, the resilience, and how I found strength in the chaos. Stick around because this isn't just a story about heartbreak. It's a story about hope, about redefining family, and about making choices that align with your truth. And who knows? Maybe you'll see parts of your own story reflected in mine. Before we dive in, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And let me know in the comments. Have you ever been in a relationship that caused tension in your family? Let's talk about it. I'd love to hear your story. Now let's get started. I still remember every detail of my wedding day. The smell of the roses, the way the sunlight spilled through the windows of the church, the way my heart raced as I walked down the aisle. Felt like a dream, the kind of day you plan and hope for your entire life. There he was, standing at the altar, smiling at me with a look that said, "You're all I've ever wanted." My heart was full, and in that moment, I thought I had finally found the love and stability I'd been searching for. My husband, let's call him Richard, was everything I thought I needed. He was kind, patient, and fiercely protective of me. From the moment we met, he made me feel safe, like I could trust him with every part of myself. He had this quiet strength about him, the kind that made you believe he could handle anything life threw his way. And for a while, I thought that strength was enough to shield us from whatever challenges might come our way. But as I stood there in that perfect moment, surrounded by friends and family, there was one glaring truth that I couldn't ignore. The man I was marrying wasn't just my partner. He was also my mom's ex-husband. Yeah, you heard that right. My husband had been married to my mom years before I ever met him. And while everyone around me was smiling, celebrating our love, I couldn't help but feel the weight of that secret pressing down on me. It wasn't like I didn't know who he was when we got engaged. He knew. But there's a difference between knowing something and fully understanding the impact it might have. At the time, it felt like just another chapter in his past, something that didn't have to define our future. After all, their marriage had ended long before I was even old enough to understand what marriage meant. And yet, as I exchanged vows with Richard, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about us, that our love story was entangled with a family drama that was far from over. I looked out into the crowd and saw my mom sitting there, her face unreadable. Was she happy for me? Was she silently judging me? I couldn't tell. All I knew was that this wasn't your typical love story. It was messy, complicated, and full of questions I wasn't sure Richard and I didn't meet in some grand romantic way. It wasn't a chance encounter at a coffee shop or a fairy tale moment at a wedding. No, we met at a family event, one of those slightly chaotic gatherings where everyone talks over each other, kids are running wild, and plates of food are being passed around like clockwork. At the time, I had no idea who he was. He was just a charming, well-spoken man who seemed oddly comfortable in the chaos. We struck up a conversation, and before I knew it, we were laughing like old friends. It wasn't until later that I learned the truth about him. My aunt, always one for a good bit of gossip, casually dropped the bombshell as we were cleaning up. "You know that's your mom's ex, right?" she said, her tone laced with both curiosity and mischief. I froze, dish in hand, trying to process what she had just said. My mom's ex. As in, they were married. Suddenly, every interaction with Richard took on a new layer of complexity. When I confronted my mom about it, she seemed unbothered. "It was a long time ago," she said with a wave of her hand. We've both moved on. She explained that their marriage had been brief, more of a youthful mistake than a deep, emotional connection. But the way she avoided eye contact told me there was more to the story. At the time, I didn't press her. I figured if it was in the past, then maybe it didn't matter. Richard, on the other hand, was refreshingly open about their relationship. When I brought it up, he didn't flinch. "Yeah, your mom and I were married," he admitted. "But we were young and dumb. We wanted different things, and it didn't work out." He went on to reassure me that there were no lingering feelings, no unresolved issues. "She's a great person," he said, "but we weren't right for each other." His honesty was disarming, and against my better judgment, I found myself trusting him. Our connection grew slowly, naturally. Richard had a way of making me feel seen, like he genuinely cared about my thoughts, my dreams, my fears. He listened in a way that no one else ever had. At first, I told myself it was just a friendship, that the spark I felt when we were together was nothing more than admiration for his maturity and kindness. But the truth was, I was falling for him. And as much as I tried to fight it, the pull between us was undeniable. The first time we kissed, it was like the world stopped spinning. I knew it was complicated, knew that pursuing a relationship with him would raise more questions than answers. But in that moment, none of it mattered. It felt right, like all the pieces of my life were finally clicking into place. Richard was my safe haven, my escape from the chaos of the world. I couldn't imagine my life without him. Still, the thought of what my mom might think lingered in the back of my mind. Would she be hurt, angry, or would she truly be as indifferent as she claimed? I debated telling her about us for weeks, but every time I worked up the courage, the words got caught in my throat. Instead, I chose to keep our relationship a secret, at least for a little while. I told myself it was better this way, that I needed time to figure out how serious we were before bringing my family into it. But secrets have a way of surfacing, don't they? And ours was no exception. One afternoon, while visiting my mom, I accidentally left my phone on the counter. A message from Richard popped up, a simple "I miss you" that gave everything away. My mom's expression shifted as she handed me my phone, her eyes narrowing as she put the pieces together. "Are you dating Richard?" she asked, her tone laced with a mixture of disbelief and something else I couldn't quite place. I hesitated, the weight of her question pressing down on me. "Yes," I finally admitted. "I am." The silence that followed was deafening. My mom stared at me for what felt like an eternity before shaking her head. "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" she said, her voice trembling. "This isn't just about you, you know. There's history here." Her words stung, but they didn't change how I felt about Richard. "I know it's complicated," I told her, "but I love him. And he loves me." I hoped that would be enough, that she'd see the sincerity in my eyes and somehow understand. But the look on her face told me otherwise. That moment marked the beginning of a long, painful journey, one filled with emotional conflict, family drama, and more hidden truths than I could have ever imagined. What started as a love story quickly became a tangled web of past relationships and forbidden romance. And the more I tried to move forward, the more the weight of their history pulled me back. Breaking the news to my family was one of the most nerve-wracking moments of my life. The weight of their potential reactions hung over me like a storm cloud, and every scenario I imagined ended in disaster. How do you tell your family that you're in love with someone who used to be married to your mother? There's no playbook for that. After my mom discovered our relationship through that text message, I knew I couldn't keep it a secret any longer. So, I decided to gather everyone together at a family dinner. Looking back, I'm not sure if it was bravery or sheer recklessness, but either way, I wanted to get it all out in the open. Richard agreed to come, even though I could see the apprehension in his eyes. "Are you sure about this?" he asked me as we drove to my mom's house. "This isn't going to be easy." I nodded, determined. "It's time," I said, though my trembling hands betrayed my confidence. The dinner started off uneventful, with the usual chatter about work, weather, and whatever drama my cousins were involved in that week. But as the meal went on, my heart pounded louder and louder, drowning out the noise around me. I glanced at Richard, who gave me a small, reassuring smile. Finally, I cleared my throat and said, "There's something I need to tell you all." The room went silent, every pair of eyes suddenly fixed on me. My mom looked up from her plate, her expression unreadable. "Richard and we're together," I said, the words tumbling out before I could second-guess myself. The shock that rippled through the room was palpable. My aunt dropped her fork. My cousin choked on her drink. And my mom. Her face turned pale, her lips pressed into a thin line as if she was trying to keep herself from saying something she'd regret. The first person to speak was my uncle, who, bless his heart, tried to lighten the mood with an awkward joke. "Well, that's one way to keep it in the family," he said, chuckling nervously. No one else laughed. My mom finally broke the silence, her voice cold and sharp. "Is this a joke?" she asked, her gaze shifting between Richard and me. "Because if it is, it's not funny." "It's not a joke," I said firmly. "We're in love. I know it's not conventional, but it's real." My mom's eyes narrowed as she leaned back in her chair. "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" she asked, her tone dripping with disapproval. "This is insane. He's my ex-husband, for God's sake." The tension in the room was unbearable. I tried to explain, to justify our relationship, but every word felt like pouring gasoline on a fire. My mom's emotions swung between anger and hurt, her voice rising as she vented her frustration. "I thought I'd seen it all, but this is beyond anything I could have imagined," she said, shaking her head. Richard tried to step in, his tone calm and measured. "I understand this is difficult," he said, addressing my mom directly. "But I care about your daughter deeply. My past with you doesn't change how I feel about her. That only seemed to make things worse." "Don't you dare talk to me about feelings," my mom snapped. "You were supposed to be out of my life, Richard. Not back in it, especially not like this." My siblings, meanwhile, were caught somewhere between disbelief and awkward amusement. My brother muttered something about how "this sounds like a soap opera," while my sister stared at me like I had grown a second head. The room was a mix of emotions: shock, betrayal, and a dash of morbid curiosity. No one seemed to know how to react. The fallout didn't end when the dinner did. In the weeks that followed, my relationship with my mom became strained to the point of breaking. She refused to talk to me directly, instead relaying messages through my siblings or sending cryptic texts that left me more confused than before. At one point, she even suggested that I was doing this to spite her, a claim that broke my heart. "This isn't about you," I told her during one particularly heated phone call. "It's about me and Richard. I wish you could see that." But it wasn't just my mom who struggled with the news. My extended family had plenty to say, too, most of it whispered behind my back. "How could she do this? Isn't it weird? What does her mom think?" The gossip spread like wildfire, turning every family gathering into a minefield of judgmental glances and whispered conversations. Even my closest friends were divided. Some supported me, insisting that love is love and that the past shouldn't matter. Others were less understanding, questioning how I could possibly be okay with marrying someone who had been part of my mom's life in such an intimate way. The moral dilemma weighed heavily on me, and there were nights when I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I had made the right choice. Through it all, Richard stood by me, his unwavering support the only thing keeping me sane. "We'll get through this," he said one night as I vented about another argument with my mom. "What we have is worth fighting for." His words gave me strength, but they didn't erase the pain of seeing my family torn apart. The reactions were a whirlwind of emotions, leaving me feeling like I was constantly on the defensive. I wanted to believe that time would heal the wounds, that my family would come to accept our relationship. But deep down, I knew that the road ahead would be anything but easy. And as the tension between us grew, I couldn't shake the feeling that there were still secrets lurking beneath the surface, truths about my mom and Richard's past that I hadn't yet uncovered. The more I tried to move forward, the more the shadows of Richard's past with my mom crept into the present. Their history had always been a vague, uncomfortable backdrop to my relationship, but now it felt like an unspoken weight we were all carrying. My mom's sharp comments and subtle digs hinted at unresolved emotions, but she never fully opened up about what had gone wrong between them. And Richard, for all his honesty, seemed to tiptoe around the topic, as if there were things he wasn't ready to share. It wasn't until I started digging on my own that I began to uncover the truth. It started innocently enough. One afternoon, while sorting through old family photos at my mom's house, I stumbled upon a box of letters and keepsakes from her marriage to Richard. At first, I hesitated to open it. This wasn't my business after all. But curiosity got the better of me, and before I knew it, I was sitting on the floor, reading through letters that painted a picture far more complicated than I'd imagined. The letters were raw and emotional, filled with both love and frustration. My mom wrote about how she felt neglected, how Richard's work always seemed to come first, how their dreams for the future never seemed to align. But there were other letters too, ones Richard had written to her. In them, he apologized for his mistakes, expressed his love for her, and begged for a second chance. It was clear that their relationship had been anything but simple, and the emotions they had shared were far deeper than the casual, it didn't work out explanation I had been given. As I read through the letters, one line jumped out at me. "I'll never forgive myself for what happened." What had happened? My stomach churned as I realized there was more to their story than I knew. When I asked my mom about it later, her reaction was immediate and defensive. "Why are you going through my things?" she snapped, snatching the letters from my hands. "That's none of your business." Her reaction only fueled my determination to find out the truth. Over the next few weeks, I started piecing together fragments of their history through conversations with family members, old photographs, and even a few awkward talks with Richard. What I discovered was shocking. Their marriage had ended not just because of growing apart but because of betrayal. Richard had cheated on my mom. The revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. The man I had fallen in love with, the man I trusted with my heart, had once betrayed the very person who had brought me into this world. When I confronted Richard about it, his face went pale. "I was young and stupid," he admitted, his voice filled with regret. "It was the biggest mistake of my life. I've spent years trying to make peace with it." He explained that the affair had been brief, a moment of weakness during a difficult time in their marriage. But to my mom, it had been the ultimate betrayal, a wound that never fully healed. The more I learned, the more conflicted I felt. On one hand, Richard wasn't the same person he had been back then. People make mistakes, and he had clearly worked hard to grow from his. But on the other hand, this wasn't just a story from his past. It was a story that directly impacted my family, my mom, and now my relationship with him. How could I reconcile the man I knew and loved with the man who had caused so much pain? My mom's anger started to make more sense. It wasn't just about me being with her ex. It was about me being with the man who had broken her heart. Every time she looked at us, she saw a reminder of the hurt she had buried for years. And as much as I wanted to believe that time would heal those wounds, I began to realize that some scars run too deep. The revelations didn't stop there. As I delved deeper into their history, I uncovered another hidden truth. Richard and my mom's relationship had started under questionable circumstances. Apparently, they had been friends long before they became a couple. Friends while my mom was still dating someone else. Their relationship had caused its own share of drama back then, leaving a trail of strained friendships and family tensions that still lingered. Learning all of this felt like peeling back layers of a story I hadn't been prepared to hear. Each new piece of information added to the psychological tension I was already feeling. My love for Richard hadn't changed, but my perception of him had. He was no longer just my partner. He was a man with a complicated past, a man who had made choices that rippled through my family in ways I was only beginning to understand. The hardest part was realizing that my mom and Richard's story wasn't just their past. It was now a part of my present. Their love, their heartbreak, their mistakes, they were all woven into the fabric of my relationship, whether I liked it or not. And as much as I wanted to move forward with Richard, I couldn't ignore the devastating revelation of his betrayal or the moral dilemmas it raised. The hidden truths about their marriage left me questioning everything. Was I doomed to repeat their mistakes? Was our love strong enough to overcome the shadow of their history? And most importantly, could I truly trust Richard to never betray me the way he had betrayed my mom? These questions weighed heavily on my mind, setting the stage for the confrontation with my mom that would ultimately change everything. The day I finally confronted my mom about everything felt inevitable. The tension between us had reached a boiling point, with every conversation veering into passive-aggressive comments and pointed silences. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I wanted to understand her feelings, her history with Richard, and, most importantly, why she seemed so determined to make this relationship harder than it already was. I showed up at her house unannounced, my heart pounding as I knocked on the door. She opened it, her expression a mix of surprise and exhaustion. "What are you doing here?" she asked, stepping aside to let me in. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "About Richard. About everything." We sat down in the living room, the air between us thick with unspoken tension. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she broke the silence. "I don't understand how you can do this," she said, her voice laced with frustration. "Of all the men in the world, you chose him." "It's not like I planned this," I shot back. "I didn't wake up one day and decide to fall in love with your ex-husband. It just happened." "Things like this don't just happen," she snapped, her eyes narrowing. "You had a choice, and you chose to ignore everything he's done, everything he put me through." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. "I know he hurt you," I said, my voice trembling. "I've read the letters. I've heard the stories. But people change, Mom. He's not the same person he was back then." She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "Do you really believe that? Do you honestly think he won't hurt you the way he hurt me?" Her voice cracked as she spoke, and for the first time, I saw something deeper beneath her anger, pain. Raw, unfiltered pain that she had been carrying for years. I felt a lump form in my throat as I realized how much her feelings were rooted in betrayal, not just disapproval. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I asked softly. "Why didn't you talk to me about what happened between you two?" "Because it wasn't your burden to carry," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "I wanted to protect you from it, from him. And now here we are, and it's like none of it even mattered." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to defend Richard, to tell her that people make mistakes and deserve second chances. But another part of me understood where she was coming from. She wasn't just angry, she was scared. Scared that history would repeat itself, that I would end up as hurt and broken as she had been. "I love him," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know it's not perfect. I know it's messy and complicated. But I love him, Mom. And I need you to understand that." She looked at me for a long time, her expression unreadable. "Love isn't enough," she said quietly. "It wasn't enough for me, and it won't be enough for you." Her words cut deep, but they also forced me to confront the reality of my situation. Was I clinging to love as a way to justify the moral dilemmas and family drama that surrounded our relationship? Was I ignoring the red flags because I didn't want to face the possibility that my mom might be right? Our conversation continued late into the night, shifting between moments of anger, sadness, and quiet reflection. My mom shared stories about her marriage to Richard, stories I had never heard before. She talked about the good times, the laughter and connection that had initially brought them together. But she also talked about the betrayals, the lies, and the heartbreak that had ultimately torn them apart. Hearing her side of the story was both illuminating and heartbreaking. It made me see Richard in a new light, not as the perfect partner I had idealized, but as a flawed, complicated man who had made mistakes. It didn't change how I felt about him, but it did force me to reevaluate how our relationship fit into the larger picture of my family. By the end of the night, my mom and I were emotionally drained, but there was a sense of catharsis in finally getting everything out in the open. "I don't know if I can ever fully accept this," she said as I got up to leave. "But I love you. And I just want you to be happy." Her words were bittersweet, a mix of resignation and hope. As I walked out the door, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The confrontation hadn't solved everything, but it had opened the door to understanding. And while I knew the road ahead would still be filled with challenges, I also knew that this was a turning point. A chance to rebuild, to find common ground, and to move forward in whatever way we could. But even as I drove home, my mind kept circling back to one question. Was love enough to overcome the scars of the past? Or was I setting myself up for a heartbreak I couldn't yet see coming? The weeks following my conversation with my mom were some of the hardest I've ever endured. The emotional fallout from everything, the hidden truths, the family betrayal, the unresolved tensions, was like a storm that refused to pass. I felt caught in the middle of something so much bigger than myself, with no clear path forward. Richard and I tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but it was nearly impossible. Every interaction with him felt heavier, shadowed by the weight of his past with my mom. I couldn't stop replaying her words in my mind. "Love isn't enough." It was like a warning echoing through every decision I made, a constant reminder that what we had might not survive the chaos around us. Our relationship began to strain under the pressure. Richard was patient, but I could see the cracks forming. He hated how much my mom's disapproval weighed on me, how it made me question everything. "Do you trust me?" he asked one night as we sat in our small living room, the silence between us deafening. I hesitated for just a moment. Too long, apparently, because his expression changed. "That's what I thought," he said quietly, getting up and walking into the bedroom. It wasn't that I didn't trust him. It was that I didn't trust the situation. How could I, when it felt like the foundation of our relationship was built on shaky ground? The psychological tension was unbearable, and I found myself doubting not just him but also my own judgment. Had I made the right choice in pursuing this relationship? Was I blinded by love, ignoring the signs that this was destined for disaster? My mom's coldness didn't help. Every time we spoke, there was a subtle edge to her tone, a reminder that she still couldn't fully accept what I was doing. She stopped inviting me to family gatherings, claiming it was too awkward with Richard in the picture. My siblings tried to play peacemakers, but their efforts only added to the strain. "Can't you just see it from her perspective?" my brother asked during one particularly heated argument. "You're with a guy who broke her heart. How do you expect her to just be okay with that?" Their words hurt because they were true. I wanted my mom to be happy for me, to see Richard as the man he was now, not the man he had been. But I also understood how hard that was for her. And as much as I tried to separate the two, their shared past kept creeping into my present. Every time I looked at Richard, I couldn't help but wonder, would he hurt me the way he hurt her? The emotional conflict began to affect other areas of my life too. Work became a challenge, with my focus constantly drifting back to the turmoil at home. My friends noticed the change in me, asking if I was okay, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them the whole truth. How could I, when I barely understood it myself? The stress was overwhelming, manifesting in sleepless nights, constant anxiety, and an almost paralyzing fear of what might come next. Richard tried his best to reassure me, but even he had his limits. "I feel like I'm paying for mistakes I made years ago," he said during one of our many late-night talks. "I can't change the past, but I'm trying to build a future with you. Isn't that enough?" His words were sincere, but they didn't erase the doubts swirling in my mind. The guilt I felt was almost as suffocating as the doubt. Guilt for hurting my mom, for putting Richard in this position, for allowing my emotions to spill over into every aspect of my life. I started to withdraw, isolating myself from the people who cared about me because I didn't know how to explain what I was feeling. Even Lauren, my closest friend, started to notice the distance. "You don't have to go through this alone," she said one afternoon, her voice filled with concern. "You can talk to me." But the truth was, I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know where to begin. Therapy became a lifeline during this time. My therapist helped me unpack the layers of emotion I was carrying: anger, sadness, guilt, love, and reminded me that it was okay to feel conflicted. "This isn't an easy situation," she said during one session. "You're allowed to grieve the family dynamic you thought you had while still fighting for the relationship you want." Her words gave me a glimmer of hope, but the road ahead still felt impossibly long. Every step forward seemed to come with a setback, every moment of clarity clouded by another wave of doubt. I started journaling as a way to process my thoughts, pouring every emotion onto the page in an attempt to make sense of the chaos. Some days it helped. Other days, it just felt like a reminder of how tangled everything had become. Despite the challenges, there were moments of light. Richard and I started seeing a couples therapist, where we were able to have honest, vulnerable conversations about our fears and hopes for the future. Slowly, we began to rebuild the trust that had been shaken by the weight of his past. My mom and I also started having more open conversations, though they were far from easy. She admitted that her anger came from a place of pain, not hatred, and I began to see that her disapproval wasn't about me. It was about her own unresolved feelings. The emotional fallout was far from over, but for the first time I felt like I was starting to move forward. The road ahead was still filled with uncertainty, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't ready to give up, on Richard, on my family, or on myself. Deciding whether to stay in my marriage with Richard or walk away was the most agonizing decision I've ever faced. Every fiber of my being was pulled in a different direction, torn between the love I felt for him and the undeniable strain our relationship was placing on my family, and on me. This wasn't just a choice about love. It was about my identity, my values, and whether I could find a way to reconcile the past with the future I wanted. I started questioning everything. Was love really enough to overcome the baggage we carried? Could I truly build a life with someone whose history was so deeply intertwined with my family's pain? These weren't hypothetical questions anymore. They were the reality I woke up to every single day. And as much as I wanted to cling to the fairy tale of love conquering all, the cracks in that narrative were growing too large to ignore. Richard, ever the optimist, believed we could make it work. "We've been through so much already," he said one night as we sat across from each other at the kitchen table. "We can get through this too." His voice was steady, his eyes full of conviction. But I could see the exhaustion behind them, the toll this was taking on him as well. He was trying so hard, and part of me wanted to believe him. But another part, the part that had heard my mom's warnings and seen the way our love story was fracturing my family, wasn't so sure. The moral dilemmas were overwhelming. Staying with Richard felt like a betrayal to my mom, a constant reminder of the hurt she had endured. But leaving him felt like a betrayal to myself, to the love we had built and the life we had envisioned together. No matter what choice I made, someone would be hurt, and that someone might very well be me. I started talking to people I trusted, hoping their perspectives might help me find clarity. Lauren, my best friend, offered her usual mix of honesty and compassion. "This is your life," she said. "Not your mom's, not Richard's. You have to figure out what's going to make you happy in the long run." Her words stuck with me, but happiness felt like such a distant concept. How could I think about the future when the present felt so chaotic? Therapy, once again, became a crucial part of the decision-making process. My therapist encouraged me to dig deep, to identify what I truly wanted. Not what I thought I should want, but what my heart and mind were telling me. She posed questions that forced me to confront the core of my dilemma. What did I value most in a relationship? What was I willing to compromise on? And perhaps most importantly, what was I afraid of losing if I stayed, or if I left? Richard and I also started having deeper conversations, ones that went beyond the surface-level reassurances we had been clinging to. We talked about our fears, our regrets, and our hopes for the future. He admitted that he sometimes felt like he was fighting a losing battle, that no matter how much he loved me, he couldn't erase the past. "I wish I could make this easier for you," he said one night. His voice filled with a sadness I hadn't seen before. "I wish I could fix everything, but I can't." His vulnerability broke something open in me. For so long, I had been carrying the weight of our relationship alone, convinced that I had to find the answers on my own. But in that moment, I realized that this wasn't just my struggle. It was ours. If we were going to make it through this, we had to do it together. Still, the doubts lingered. I started imagining what my life might look like without Richard. How it would feel to start over, to rebuild my relationships with my mom and my family without the constant tension his presence created. It was a tempting thought, but it also felt incomplete. Because as much as I struggled with the complexities of our relationship, I couldn't deny the love that had brought us together in the first place. One night, as I sat alone in the living room, I wrote 2 lists. One for staying, one for leaving. The list for staying was filled with words like love, loyalty, and the memories we had created together. The list for leaving was harder to write, but it included things like family harmony, a fresh start, and the chance to rebuild trust with my mom. Looking at those lists, I realized there was no perfect choice. Only the choice I could live with. In the end, I made a decision, not because I was sure it was the right one, but because I knew I couldn't stay in limbo forever. It was a decision rooted in love, yes, but also in hope. A hope that we could find a way to navigate the challenges together, that the bond we shared was strong enough to withstand the weight of our history. But even as I chose to fight for our relationship, I knew the journey was far from over. The scars of the past don't disappear overnight, and the road to healing is rarely a straight line. There would be more hard conversations, more moments of doubt, more questions I couldn't yet answer. But for now I was choosing love, imperfect, complicated, messy love. And I was choosing to see where it might lead. If there's one thing I've learned from this entire experience, it's that life doesn't come with a guidebook for navigating the messy, complicated realities of love and family. You just have to take it one day at a time, making the best decisions you can with the information you have. And sometimes those decisions don't lead to neat, happy endings. Sometimes they lead you to discover your own strength in the chaos. The first lesson I learned was about resilience. For so long I thought resilience meant being unbreakable, like nothing could shake me. But I've come to realize that resilience isn't about avoiding pain. It's about facing it head-on, even when it feels like it might consume you. It's about finding a way to keep moving forward, even when the path is littered with obstacles. And let me tell you, there were plenty of obstacles in this journey. I also learned the importance of boundaries, not just with others but with myself. For a long time, I let my desire to keep everyone happy overshadow my own needs. I tried to be the bridge between Richard and my mom, the peacekeeper in a war I didn't start. But eventually, I realized that I couldn't carry the weight of everyone else's emotions. I had to set boundaries to protect my own mental and emotional well-being. That meant saying no, stepping back, and letting go of the guilt that came with those choices. Another crucial lesson was about forgiveness, not just for others but for myself. I spent so much time blaming myself for the hurt and tension my relationship caused within my family. I questioned whether I had made the right choices, whether I could have done something differently to avoid all this pain. But through therapy and self-reflection, I came to understand that forgiveness isn't about excusing what happened. It's about releasing the hold it has on you, so you can move forward without carrying the weight of resentment. This experience also forced me to redefine my understanding of love. Love isn't a fairy tale. It's messy, complicated, and often imperfect. It's not just about the feelings you have for someone. It's about the choices you make to nurture that connection, even when it's hard. But love alone isn't enough. Trust, honesty, and mutual respect are just as important, if not more so. Without them, love becomes fragile, vulnerable to the cracks created by betrayal and unresolved tensions. Through all the heartbreak and conflict, I found a deeper sense of self-worth. I learned to value my own voice, my own needs, and my own happiness. For years, I had let the opinions and expectations of others dictate my choices. But this experience taught me that I have the right to prioritize myself, to make decisions that align with my values and desires, even if they're difficult, even if they don't please everyone. One of the most surprising lessons was about the power of vulnerability. Sharing my story, even when it felt uncomfortable, allowed me to connect with others in ways I hadn't expected. Friends, family members, even strangers reached out to share their own experiences with love, betrayal, and family drama. Their stories reminded me that I wasn't alone, that the challenges I faced were part of a larger human experience. And in those connections I found strength and comfort. Perhaps the most important lesson was about growth. This journey wasn't just about my relationship with Richard or my mom. It was about my relationship with myself. I realized that growth often comes from the most painful moments, from the times when you're forced to confront your fears, your flaws, and your deepest insecurities. It's not an easy process, but it's one that can lead to incredible transformation if you're willing to embrace it. In the end, I've come to see this experience not as a failure, but as a chapter in my story. A messy, emotional, and sometimes heartbreaking chapter, yes, but one that taught me lessons I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. It showed me that even in the darkest moments, there's a path forward. It might not be clear, and it might not be easy, but it's there, waiting for you to find it. For anyone going through something similar, my hope is that you find your own strength in the chaos. That you learn to trust yourself, to forgive yourself, and to embrace the messiness of life. Because at the end of the day, it's not about avoiding pain. It's about finding the courage to grow from it. Looking back on everything I've been through, I can honestly say that my understanding of love, trust, and family has changed forever. This experience, as painful and complicated as it was, forced me to confront parts of myself and my relationships that I might have otherwise ignored. And while the journey wasn't easy, it taught me the kind of resilience and self-awareness that only comes from facing life's hardest challenges. Love, I've realized, is so much more than just feelings or passion. It's a choice. It's choosing to show up, to be vulnerable, to work through the messy, uncomfortable parts of a relationship. But it's also about knowing your limits, recognizing when love alone isn't enough, and finding the courage to walk away if necessary. For me, love meant fighting for my relationship with Richard while also redefining the boundaries of my relationships with my mom and my family. Family, too, has taken on a new meaning for me. It's not just about blood or shared history. It's about connection, trust, and mutual respect. Sometimes family is messy and imperfect, and that's okay. What matters is the effort you put into understanding and supporting each other, even when it feels impossible. My mom and I are still working on rebuilding our relationship, but I've learned that progress doesn't have to be perfect to be meaningful. Most importantly, I've learned that my happiness and well-being are my responsibility. It's easy to get caught up in the expectations of others, to prioritize their approval over your own needs. But at the end of the day, you have to live with your choices. And for me, the choice to prioritize love, growth, and authenticity was worth every difficult moment. As I close this chapter of my story, I want to leave you with this. Life is rarely black and white. It's full of gray areas, moral dilemmas, and decisions that don't come with easy answers. But that's where the beauty lies, in the complexity, in the growth that comes from navigating the chaos. If you're going through something similar, know that you're not alone. You have the strength to face whatever comes your way, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. So now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever faced a situation that forced you to redefine love or family? What lessons did you learn along the way? Share your story in the comments. I truly believe we grow stronger by sharing and learning from each other's experiences. Before you go, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Your support means the world to me, and together, we're creating a community where no one has to face life's challenges alone. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next video. Life rarely unfolds the way we expect, and sometimes the most challenging situations are the ones that teach us the greatest lessons. My story isn't just about love, family, or betrayal. It's about finding the strength to face the chaos, embrace the truth, and rebuild on your own terms. And now, I want to challenge you to take a closer look at your own life. What relationships, choices, or hidden truths are holding you back from living authentically? What would happen if you finally faced them head-on? Ask yourself. Are you prioritizing your happiness? Or are you letting others dictate how your life should be? It's not an easy question, but it's one worth asking. The hardest part of change is taking the first step, and maybe this is your moment to do just that. Maybe it's time to set those boundaries, have those tough conversations, or take that leap of faith you've been avoiding. So what's stopping you? Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a situation that forced you to redefine your relationships or question your path? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to learn from you and create a space where we can all grow together. Your voice matters, and this is a safe place to share it. Before you go, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on those notifications. There are more stories, insights, and lessons to come, and I don't want you to miss out. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for being part of this journey with me. I'll see you in the next video, ready to tackle life's challenges together.